Welcome. My name is Amanda Zika, and I am the manager of the First Year Experience Office at Rock Valley College. Today, we're going to talk about study strategies and set you up with some tips for effective learning. So our goal for today is to understand different types of active learning and how to not be a passive learner. I hope you'll take away some new strategies for learning in college level courses and think of a variety of new ways to look at new material. So as we get started, think about your own study habits. How do you study? How do you prepare for exams and quizzes? A lot of us have probably sat down to read a textbook for a few hours or looked at our class materials and then realized we had no idea what we just read or looked at. Where did those last few hours go? So we spend all this time studying and then we get our final exam back or our quiz and have a lower grade than we were hoping for, and that can be really discouraging. Sometimes in high school we were able to maybe memorize material or get ready for an exam easily, but we find out college level courses are much different and we need to figure out how to study in a different way. So today we're going to talk about a few different strategies. There are quite a few more out there, but I tried to focus on just a few. We want to think about how to be engaged when we're both reading and taking notes, something called spaced or distributive practice, active recall and retrieval, an example of which will be practice testing, interleaving, and elaboration. So just remember that not all of us just are born knowing how to study. So you might have to do some trial and error, and you might have to be patient for yourself. Be open to trying new things and maybe making a few mistakes along the way. Also, give yourself time to try these new concepts. So you don't want to start a brand new concept in the middle of the night before an exam. Have a positive mindset that you can try new things and do well. And also remember that different people study in different ways. So what works for you might not work for your best friend. So as I mentioned earlier, we want to avoid being passive, right? So when we sit down to read a college level textbook, for a lot of us, we need to do something beyond just looking at the material. You need to go beyond just attending class or watching a lecture on Zoom or looking at a PowerPoint in an online class. Our whole goal is to work to commit these things to long-term memory. We want to learn, not just memorize and then dump them from our brain, especially if you're taking a class that's a prerequisite, right? So if Chemistry 110 and Bio 100 are prerequisites for anatomy and microbiology, it is expected that you will then know that material when you go on to those advanced classes. So keep in mind, you will have to understand material for the future. You also will need to think about studying different types of subjects differently. So your study strategy for biology will probably look much different than your history class. For math, a lot of us, it's just watching problems and doing example problems ourselves. Whereas something like a Spanish class, you may be reviewing vocabulary, maybe flashcards would work for that. So we're going to start with one type of engaging reading technique. So when you are looking at your textbook, one thing that you could try is called SQ3R. So if you're assigned a chapter, you would take your chapter, and it's an acronym. The S stands for surveying. So preview, look through or skim or scan the whole chapter. What will I even be reading about? What's in store for me? The Q stands for question. And so you will want to create questions for yourself. Sometimes you can even turn headings into questions that you will be able to go back and answer. Then you'll read, and maybe even during the reading that you're taking notes or doing something engaging as you're reading, which we'll talk about a note-taking technique in a moment. Then you'll go back and you'll recite the answers to the questions. So if your heading was turned into a question, answer the question and read it back to yourself or perhaps write it out. Then one of the really important things for studying is to go back and review. So whether it's the next day or in a week, and perhaps even a couple of times, go back and review the questions and make sure that you can still recite the answers. You don't just want to look at material once and leave it until the exam. If you look up SQ3R online, you can find other videos and examples as well. Next, we're going to talk about one example of a note-taking technique, and on the next slide, I'll show you what this looks like. So this is called the Cornell Method of note-taking. When you take notes, it's great to organize your notes, and sometimes you can even go back and reorganize them. So what you're going to do is you're going to divide your paper up. You're going to record the notes in a note-taking area, so key ideas, concepts, etc. If you are doing this during a lecture class, you can go back and rewrite them at home, which is a great way to review as well. You're going to create a cue column and take down key notes or concepts. And what you'll be able to do, and I'll show you in just a moment, is you'll cover the right-hand side of your notes to try to actively recall the information. So this is a lot like that recite and review that we mentioned a moment ago. So if you take a look here are a few examples from different classes of that layout of the paper. So you're creating 3 sections: the cue column, note taking, and then on the bottom you can write a summary. So reflect in your own words or paraphrase what you were learning about as well. So if I wanted to go back the next day or next week and study, I would cover up the note taking area and turn those cue column areas into questions to see if I could then recall that information. So you could really pair SQ3R and Cornell as well. Next, we're going to move on to spaced or distributive practice. So this is a technique where we will distribute or spread out our studying. It's thought that multiple short study sessions are going to be more efficient for your brain than long study sessions. So if you've ever sat down and tried to cram a bunch of information into your brain the night before an exam, it usually doesn't go well. So maybe rather than just studying the night before, we start a few weeks out and we study for 30 minutes or an hour. This example shows 3 hours at a time. And it's thought then if you have some nights where you sleep between each session, your brain actually will work on committing these to your memory as well. Also, in each of those shorter sessions, you might think about looking at the same material but in different ways. So really vary how you're studying the material or how you're looking at it. So spacing it out over time will help your brain as well and make it easier for you. So another example of a type of technique we'll talk about today is active recall or retrieval. So you can see we're starting to have a theme where everything is making you really do a little more work, right? Pushing your brain a little more. So the process of remembering information, challenging yourself. You want to move these things, like I said, to your long-term memory. So you'll review the material first, and you can look at multiple sessions. I usually recommend multiple sessions for almost every study technique. One example might be flashcards. So you can make your own, go to the store and buy index cards. A lot of students like websites like Quizlet. There are a lot of other sites out there that you might utilize as well. Quizlet has some pre-made flashcards, and then you can also make your own. Another way that you could try to make sure you can actively recall information is to try to teach the information to someone else without using your materials or your notes. So even if it's mom or dad or your dog, it doesn't have to be someone in your class. Sit and try to be the teacher. If you can successfully teach someone else or talk about it, that means you probably have a good handle on it. And then try to also answer questions yourself without reviewing your notes. So if you create those questions like we mentioned earlier, try first to cover up the answers and see if you can get it. That's a great way to see if it's committed to your long-term memory. One example that you all probably have access to in your textbooks is practice testing. A lot of textbooks have a practice test or summary at the end of the chapter or the end of the unit that will provide questions that you can answer for yourself. Use those. Or perhaps if your professor gives you a study guide, use that study guide. They created it for a reason. Try to answer the questions yourselves to see what you can get, and if you have to go back and review in your book, that's okay. Sometimes you might have to go through these materials a few times. So take any practice quizzes or tests that you can find, whether you're going online or using your textbook. And this might not be as useful as some of our other techniques, but it's a great way to give yourself a starting point. All right, another example would be elaboration. Can you create a link between concepts you're studying and knowledge you have? A lot of us really like those professors who use stories or anecdotes in class. Write those down. Those will help you remember things. Find examples in your textbooks, or are there any real-world examples? When we're learning about the parts of a cell, a lot of times we like to say, okay, the mitochondria is the power plant, right? The powerhouse for the cell. And so we create these things that are similes or analogies for us to learn. Also helpful for students are mnemonic devices, right? We all learned Roy G. Biv or Please Excuse My Dear Aunt Sally, and we probably remember those from being a kid because they were really easy to remember. Some people like to create poems or create songs, whatever helps your brain remember that material. Next is interleaving, where we're going to mix it up. So can we mix up our subjects or types of problems or material as we're studying? Even more helpful would be if things are linked in some way. This is trying to kind of throw your brain a curveball, right? When you sit down to take an exam, you might not know exactly what's coming your way. So if you can get your brain ready for a variety of changes or different types of problems, then you'll probably be ready to sit down and do well. A really good example of this is when you're younger and you're doing math facts. You might sit down and have flashcards that are some addition, some subtraction, maybe throw in some multiplication. So then your brain is just ready to change gears as you're learning. So hopefully those are helpful. There are a lot of other study strategies out there if you go online or learn other things, but I just wanted to highlight a few and some of my other tips for success just in general. Stay motivated. That can often be hard for students, so keep yourself going. Keep materials from key classes you may need in the future. My example earlier of chemistry and biology, save those notes. Maybe you'll use them again in microbiology or anatomy. Explore your learning preferences, whether it's the VARC, visual, auditory, reading, writing, kinesthetic, or other materials out there. Form study groups in your classes, get to know your classmates. Take advantage of your instructors, they're here to help. Visit their office hours, communicate with them. Set goals for yourself, think about your time management skills. Take care of yourself. Self-care is really important, mentally, physically, and also use our campus resources that are here to help. So here are a few. There are, of course, a lot more at RVC, whether it's the tutoring, writing center, math lab. Take advantage of everything we have to offer. You've already paid for these with your student fees, so during your semester, these are free for you, and use them. We want to help you succeed. So that's everything I have for today. If you need anything, you can always call or email me. My office is located on the first floor of the Student Center, and I hope you found that material helpful. Thank you.